All right, folks, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into a topic that might sound a little, well, intimidating at first glance. Economics and finance.
Uh-huh.
But trust me on this one.
Yeah.
This deep dive is going to be anything but dry and boring. We're taking on The Price of Time by Edward Chancellor.
Okay.
And this book, it's a real eye-opener.
Right.
It takes us on a journey through the history of interest rates, and you start to see how they impact, well, pretty much everything, from your own personal finances to, like, massive global trends. It's fascinating.
You know, you might be surprised to learn just how deeply interest rates are intertwined with our lives.
Yeah.
Like, we tend to think of them as just the cost of borrowing money.
Right, right.
But it goes so much deeper than that.
I'm intrigued, for sure. So spill the beans. How so? How are interest rates about more than just, the price tag on a loan?
Well, think of it this way.
Yeah.
Would you rather have, say, $100 today
Today.
or $100 a year from now?
Oh, today, for sure. Cash in hand, baby.
Exactly. Most people would choose the money today.
Yeah.
And that's because there's inherent value in having something now rather than later, right?
Makes sense.
That's your personal time preference at work.
Oh, time preference. Okay.
Yeah.
That's like how much we value something now versus in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, that same principle, that time preference, it helps us understand how interest rates work in the economy as a whole. It's like the price individuals and businesses are willing to pay to have access to someone else's money right now.
That's interesting. So it's almost like a collective impatience driving up the price of time.
You could say that, yeah. And what's even more wild is that this concept, it's been around for like a really long time. We're talking millennia.
Millennia, seriously. So like interest was a thing even before people were walking around with, I don't know, pockets full of gold coins.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even back in ancient Mesopotamia, even before they had coined money,
Wow.
they charged interest on loans of grain or livestock.
Whoa. So I could have owed someone like a whole flock of sheep if I didn't pay back my loan on time.
You got it. That's the price of time for you.
I'm starting to see why Chancellor called his book The Price of Time, that's for sure. But tell me, what was the attitude towards interest back then? Did people just see it as a normal part of doing business?
Not really, no. The idea of usury, which is lending money at super high interest rates,
Right, usury.
that was condemned for centuries.
Yeah.
A lot of cultures saw it as morally wrong to profit from someone else's tough situation.
So it's always been this kind of push and pull, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The practicality of interest versus the ethical concerns around it. It's like a balancing act. So how did those views, evolve over time? How did we get from there to where we are now?
Well, as societies and economies got more complex, attitudes shifted too. Like usury remained a concern, for sure.
Yeah.
But you started to see growing acceptance of interest as a necessary part of commerce, of finance. Although a lot of times they would have limits on how much interest could be charged.
Oh, interesting. Like putting some guardrails up?
Yes.
So did everybody just kind of go along with this shift? Weren't there people who pushed back? I mean, it seems like a pretty big change.
Absolutely. And the book talks about John Locke, a 17th century philosopher who had some real reservations about messing with interest rates, specifically artificially lowering them.
Oh, okay.
He argued that that could actually lead to people taking on way more risk
More risk, okay.
and that it would ultimately harm the whole economy. His concerns are kind of echoing through the centuries, and they're eerily relevant today.
That's kind of spooky, right? Like hundreds of years later, and we're still grappling with the same issues.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned manipulating interest rates. Didn't somebody try that, like really try that back in the 18th century? And didn't it kind of blow up in their face?
You're thinking of John Law, right?
Yeah, John Law.
And the Mississippi bubble?
The Mississippi bubble, yeah, that sounds familiar.
It's a cautionary tale for sure. The Price of Time digs into that story, and it's wild.
So artificially lowering interest rates, that's what he did.
Yeah. Yeah, so John Law, this ambitious Scotsman, he convinces the French government to implement this system, right?
Okay, his system.
And it involves paper money, which was new at the time, and like you said, artificially lowered interest rates.
Yeah.
His idea was to stimulate the economy, get things moving.
Right, jumpstart it.
But it backfired big time.
Ah, the Mississippi bubble. Didn't that end badly?
Oh, yeah, it did. The whole thing led to this insane frenzy of speculation around the Mississippi Company's stock.
Oh, boy. A stock bubble.
Yeah, a bubble.
And bubbles, they pop.
They always do.
So what happened?
The bubble burst, of course.
Of course.
And it caused widespread financial ruin. Like, people lost everything. John Law's system, It's a prime example of how manipulating interest rates, you might get a temporary boom,
Yeah, short term.
but it often ends in disaster.
So have we learned our lesson from history?
That's a great question, and one that we'll keep exploring as we dive deeper into the price of time.
Because it seems like this cycle, booms and busts driven by interest rates, it's a recurring theme throughout history, isn't it?
Definitely. It's like a financial roller coaster.
And the book talks about the credit cycle, right? Is that what you're referring to?
It is. Chancellor delves into the work of Walter Bagehot.
Bastiat, okay.
He was a 19th century economist who lived through these cycles firsthand. And he made this keen observation. He noticed that when interest rates fall below 2%,
Below 2%, okay.
it often triggers this excessive speculation, this risky behavior.
So like a warning sign.
Exactly. And Bagehot's work, it highlights the dangers of easy credit. And it has some, well, eerie parallels to the low interest rate environment we've been in recently.
It's like history is rhyming, isn't it?
It often does.
It's kind of unsettling, to be honest. It's amazing to me how something like interest rates, which seems so abstract, can have such massive real-world consequences. It's like a domino effect, impacting individual decisions, investments, and ultimately the stability of the whole financial system. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, you start to realize economics is not just some theoretical thing happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's about human behavior, our psychology,
Right.
how we respond to incentives,
Yeah.
and the choices we make under different conditions.
It's all connected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, Chancellor doesn't stop there.
He keeps going.
Oh, yeah. He takes us even deeper into how interest rates impact things like social trends and even inequality.
Really?
Yeah, it's fascinating. He introduces this term financial repression, which is essentially what happens when governments keep interest rates artificially low, often to help out borrowers.
Now, at first glance, that sounds like a good thing. Help out borrowers. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What's the problem with that?
Well, it might seem beneficial on the surface,
Right, short term.
but over the long haul, financial repression can create some serious problems. It can lead to things like, capital not being allocated efficiently.
Meaning what? Like investments going to the wrong places.
Exactly.
Okay.
It can discourage people from saving, which is crucial for a healthy economy.
Yeah, I see that.
And it can even contribute to economic stagnation, like a slowdown.
So even though low interest rates might seem appealing at first, there's a potential downside.
There is, and one of the most worrisome aspects is its impact on inequality. Chancellor argues that these prolonged periods of low interest rates actually make wealth inequality worse.
Okay, now explain that one to me. How does that happen?
Well, he points to the work of economist Raghuram Rajan. And Rajan criticized policymakers for basically telling struggling workers, let them eat credit.
Let them eat credit.
Right.
Wow.
Instead of actually addressing the real underlying issues like income stagnation, it's a powerful image because low interest rates might encourage people to borrow more, but they don't solve the root problems causing economic hardship.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, isn't it?
It's a very expensive Band-Aid. It seems like a classic example of short-term relief leading to much bigger long-term consequences.
Absolutely. And I'm really curious to hear more about how these themes play out in the modern world in the era of, quantitative easing and all these other interventions. We've covered a lot of ground already, but it feels like we're just getting started.
We are. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how this search for yield and the growing influence of central banks have further shaped the economic landscape. It's going to be a wild ride, so you won't want to miss it.
I'm ready. Bring it on. So we just left off talking about how manipulating interest rates, especially keeping them artificially low, can lead to some pretty significant unintended consequences.
Yeah, we've seen that throughout history.
For sure. And those consequences, they can be big.
Huge.
Yeah.
Like fueling those asset bubbles we talked about.
Right.
And even making wealth inequality worse.
It's pretty alarming when you think about it. And it sounds like things get even more complex when we enter the modern world. I mean, we've got all these, sophisticated financial instruments, and the role of central banks has just exploded. Chancellor takes us there, and the price of time, right?
Wow. He does. He argues that these ultra-low interest rates we've seen in recent decades have driven investors into this, he calls it a search for yield.
Okay, search for yield. Break that down for me. What does that actually mean?
So imagine, right, that safe investments, like those government bonds we talked about, they're offering really low returns, barely anything.
Okay.
Investors, they want to make money, right?
Naturally.
So they start looking for higher returns. But to get those higher returns, they got to take on more risk.
riskier assets.
Exactly. So they start piling into these riskier assets, hoping to make a quick buck. It's kind of like, a high-stakes game of musical chairs.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Everyone's scrambling for a seat when the music stops.
And when the music stops in this game, someone's left standing, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, that scramble for higher returns, it doesn't always end well. Often it fuels those asset bubbles we were talking about.
Right, like with tech stocks in the late 90s.
Exactly. The dot-com bubble.
Or the housing market in the mid-2000s.
Another classic example. Chancellor uses those as prime examples of how this desperate search for yield can go very wrong.
It's just incredible to me how something as seemingly abstract as interest rates can have these huge real-world consequences. It's like one thing leads to another, and suddenly you've got these ripple effects impacting everything. Individual investment choices, sure, but then also the stability of the entire financial system.
It's a chain reaction.
It is. It makes you realize economics is not just about numbers and spreadsheets. It's about human behavior. It's psychology.
Absolutely. It's about incentives and the choices we make. And Chancellor really drives that point home.
And speaking of choices, sometimes those choices lead to some pretty complex financial instruments. I mean, Chancellor dives into things like derivatives and CDOs, right?
He does. Collateralized debt obligations.
Yeah, those things. How do those fit into this whole story?
Well, these complex investments, they became really popular during periods of low interest rates because, they seem to offer the promise of higher returns.
Of course. Got to chase that yield.
Right. But they also carried a lot of hidden risks. Risks that a lot of investors didn't really understand.
So complexity masking risk. Classic recipe for disaster, isn't it? What happens when things inevitably go south?
Yeah, the consequences can be pretty severe, like we saw in 2008.
Right. It's like building a house of cards.
Perfect analogy. The higher you go, the more unstable the whole thing becomes. And Chancellor's point is that this complexity, it's often encouraged by that environment created by those low interest rates.
So like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it can be. But he doesn't just stop with investors. He also looks at the role of central banks in all of this.
Okay, let's talk central banks. I mean, their role has expanded so much, especially since the 2008 financial crisis.
Right.
Dramatically. Chancellor argues that these central bank policies, things like quantitative easing and even negative interest rates.
Negative interest rates? That sounds crazy.
It does, doesn't it?
But they're real.
Oh, yeah. They're wielding incredible influence over financial markets and how capital is actually allocated. So much power concentrated in the hands of central bankers. Honestly, I gotta admit, I'm a little fuzzy on those terms. Quantitative easing, negative interest rates. Can you break those down for our listeners?
Sure. So imagine a central bank wants to stimulate lending and investment.
Okay, yeah.
One tool they use is quantitative easing.
QE.
Right, QE. Basically, they pump money into the economy by buying up assets, like government bonds.
So they're creating more money.
In a way, yeah. It's an attempt to boost economic activity.
Kickstart things.
But as we've seen, it can have those unintended consequences.
Right, like we were just talking about. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's QE. Now, what about these negative interest rates? I mean, that just sounds counterintuitive.
It does. It means that banks are actually charged to hold their money at the central bank.
They have to pay to keep their money there.
Yep. It's a pretty extreme measure.
Sounds like it.
The goal is to encourage them to lend more, to get that money moving.
Okay, so it's like pushing them to lend.
Right. But again, it can distort markets and create some really strange incentives.
It sounds like we're in uncharted territory.
In a lot of ways, we are.
So what does Chancellor have to say about the potential consequences of these policies? I mean, it sounds like he's pretty concerned.
He is. He's worried about a number of unintended consequences, particularly what's called moral hazard.
Moral hazard. Now, what's that?
It's basically what happens when investors take on more risk because they believe that central banks will always bail them out.
Ah, so if you know someone's going to catch you when you fall, you're more likely to take a risk.
Exactly. And this can lead to the emergence of, get this, zombie companies.
Zombie companies. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
These are businesses that would have failed under normal circumstances,
Right.
but they're kept alive by these artificially low interest rates.
So they're like the Walking Dead of the corporate world?
Pretty much. And the problem is they can actually stifle economic growth.
Because they're not really competitive, are they?
Exactly. They're taking up resources and market share that could go to new, innovative companies.
So we're propping up the old at the expense of the new.
That's one way to look at it. And
Mhm.
Chancellor connects this idea to Friedrich Hayek.
Hayek.
Yeah, he was a Nobel Prize-winning economist, wrote The Road to Serfdom.
I've heard of that.
Hayek was really worried about central planning and how it could stifle individual freedom and economic dynamism. And Chancellor sees some parallels between those concerns and what's happening today with the expanding role of central banks.
It's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot to digest.
It really is. So where do we go from here? What are the long-term implications of all of this? What does it mean for us?
Those are the million-dollar questions. And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore what this new normal of low interest rates and these really powerful central banks might mean for the future of capitalism, innovation, and social mobility, and what it all means for you.
Well, folks, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Edward Chancellor's The Price of Time, and man, what a journey it's been.
It has
From ancient Mesopotamia to modern-day central banking, we've covered a lot of ground.
a lot of ground.
Really makes you think. So, as we wrap things up, what are the key takeaways? What does it all mean for us, for everyday people?
I think the biggest takeaway, the thing that really stuck with me, is that interest rates, they're incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
more complex than most people realize. And they touch everything from our individual choices to, like, global economy
Are
everywhere.
everywhere. And understanding them better can help us make sense of so much. The financial news, investment decisions, even those broader social trends we were talking about.
So it's not just about, like, understanding your mortgage, your savings account. It's about understanding the world around us.
Exactly.
Mm.
And I think what Chancellor does so well in The Price of Time is he challenges how we think about interest rates.
He does.
He makes us think critically about their role in our lives, in society as a whole.
Yeah. And he doesn't exactly let us off easy, does he? He leaves us with some pretty big, pretty tough questions to grapple with. No, he doesn't. He asks us to really consider what this, new normal of low interest rates and these powerful central banks, what that might mean for the future.
For the future of everything, really.
Yeah, capitalism, innovation, even social mobility. He even raises the question, is there a point where the cure, these low rates, becomes worse than the disease?
The disease it was meant to fix.
Exactly. That's a big question. No easy answers.
No. But that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating, right?
But
It's challenging. It makes us rethink things.
I think one thing Chancellor really highlights is that while those low interest rates might have some short-term benefits, they also come with hidden risks. And those risks often play out over a long period, which makes them harder to spot, even harder to fix.
So what do we do as individuals? I mean, do we just kind of ride the wave and hope for the best?
Well, I think awareness is the first step.
Okay.
Understanding how interest rates actually function, the potential consequences when they're manipulated, that's crucial.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
It really is. And with that knowledge, we can start making more informed decisions. In our own financial lives, for sure, but also as participants in the larger economy.
Hmm.
We can demand more transparency from policymakers, hold them accountable for the decisions they're making about interest rates.
Right, because those decisions, they affect us all.
They do. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these massive economic forces, but we're not.
We can make a difference.
Absolutely. Chancellor doesn't offer easy answers. The Price of Time doesn't have some magic formula.
Right.
But it gives us a framework for understanding the challenges we face. And it empowers us to be more active, more informed participants in shaping the future.
It's a call to action.
It is.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. And to our listeners, if you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out The Price of Time by Edward Chancellor. It's a challenging read, but it's so worth it.
It really is. It'll change how you see the world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Price of Time. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic to explore. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.